Hey, everybody. Welcome to the beginning of a very special series brought to you by Ledger and FWB, the social network called Friends with Benefits. Very special for me because I'm joined by my daughter, Zoe Rogers. Hey, Z, how are you?
Hey Dad, I'm doing great. This is the first in a series of interviews that we're gonna do together, which we've never done before. By the way, my first podcast interview ever, so this is
Oh, come on.
exciting
You've
for
been
me.
doing radio since you were 13
Um,
years old.
it's true. I've been doing radio for a long time, but not talk radio, so it's different. So what we wanted to do, I actually have been a member of FWB since the beginning in 2020, and I now work on digital events for the Discord or for the DAO. And so what we wanted to do was a series of interviews together, and this is kind of our first collaborative effort between Ledger and FWB. And we're leading up this summer to the second iteration of FWB Fest, where we really take the kind of URL community of FWB that mostly lives on a Discord and is now starting to live in an app, and we convene in a physical location, actually in this beautiful place called Idlewild, California, where there's this amazing liberal arts high school, and we take over the campus. And it's part music fest, part concert, or sorry, part conference, and just kind of all hanging out and talking about things. And so, what we wanted to do was line up some interesting interviews to get everybody kind of excited about, creative culture and creative custody leading up to this big FWB event. And so today, on this very first inaugural episode, we're going to be talking to Alex Zhang, who's the mayor of the Discord. And we'll go in a little bit more in the interview to like what exactly that means. So never fear. But to kick everything off today, we're going to figure out what FWB is up to, how we got here, and get ready for some really interesting conversations over the next couple of months.
Excellent. Let's do it. I want to get into the bio of you, Alex. But let's start off, Alex. What was the most recent concert you saw, and what was the first concert you ever saw?
Man, first off, super happy to be here for the first one. It's really special to see the dynamic between you two, and to be a fly on the wall even for the first couple of minutes has been very, very adorable. And I'll just kind of chime in to say I'm also a college radio head and ran my college radio station at USC. So I definitely think there's some weird kindred spirits between folks who somehow find their way into the weird world of Web3 or community work or whatever,
Yep.
community culture work. And I think the loveless loveless labor that goes into running and operating a student run radio station
Yep.
I think we all tap into a special place there. So that was a fun fact I didn't know about either of you guys. But yeah, first concert, last concert. Let's see. I'll start with last concert. Was I went to Coachella for just Sunday to go see Fortet, Fred again, and Skrillex, just because I was very curious about, clearly they've been having a meteoric kind of zeitgeist moment, and I was just curious to see how that translated into like the headlining slot at Coachella after Blink 182, which is like a legendary slot.
Wow.
And I thought what they did there was really, really creative and phenomenal, where they brought the stage out into the middle of the crowd and did no visuals, which was like something that a headliner has never, ever done. So that was really, really interesting and cool to see. And then first concert, it's probably something embarrassing like Wiz Khalifa or Swayze or something when I was like in sixth grade.
That's not
Yeah.
so embarrassing. I've heard much more embarrassing when I ask this question. Az, real quickly, what was your most recent concert and your first? I think I know your first, and I wonder if
Yeah,
you do.
you would know your first maybe before you do.
Yeah, I
I'm
think
sure.
I.
I think I know I think you guys took me to see Paul Simon when I
That's
was a
correct.
tiny,
Oh
tiny
wow.
baby.
She was about 8
Yeah.
months old. It was the Rhythm of the Saints tour. Yeah,
Yeah.
Oh
that
my
is
God.
factual.
My hearing is totally shot from all of the years of going to concerts with my dad.
Not Nine Inch
Um,
Nails shows the one you took me to in Paris a couple years ago.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then this week, on Friday, I saw the Hold Steady here in Portland, and they just put out a new record, and it was funny because their banner on the stage said established 2003, 20 years of the hold steady. And I was like, that's the year I started Zoe Radio. And it was like, definitely hold steady was absolutely on those first playlists. So it was really fun to go to that concert this week. What about you, Dad?
My first concert, my sister took me to see REO Speedwagon at the Notre Dame ACC, 1979. And then last night I went to Willie Nelson's 90th birthday, which was at the Hollywood Bowl. Yeah, which was pretty amazing. It ended with Keith Richards and Willie Nelson singing "We Are Going to Live Forever," which I was sitting there thinking, like, they might. That could be true. They might be the first ones. All right, let's jump into it.
Awesome.
Alex, so give us some background, but also, I mean, I really want to dig into the specifics of what it is you're doing now, because I think it's incredibly interesting and futuristic, but it's also probably evolved a ton even over the past 12 months. So I'm really curious, how you got to be doing what you're doing, and then what the hell is it you're doing right now?
I love it. I think I ask myself that every day. So I guess looking back at sort of my journey or my path, both sort of professionally or culturally or personally, has always revolved around sort of the intersectionality between culture and technology. But sort of at the core of that, what's always just driven me since as long as I can remember has been people. I think since I was a little kid, I was obsessed with how people converged or diverged or came together, the motivations, the incentives, like how groups of people could come together to accomplish shared goals and interesting things. I think what that manifested in university was running a college radio station and running my on-campus co-working space that I started, and a student-run, tech incubator, and was interested in like blurring the lines between multiple genres, as I sort of called it. So it wasn't just about the radio station or just about the startup incubator. It was about throwing tech demo days where I'd have my DJs at the radio station come do ambient sets during a demo day. It was really about the kind of blurring of multiple different cultures. That took me to an organization called Summit that was pursuing this at sort of a larger scale through a series and a network of conferences all around the world that were sort of creating a new category of ideas festivals. It was kind of like merging a music festival format with sort of a traditional stale conference format to create something a lot more multisensory, a lot more multidisciplinary, and was there for the last 5 years wearing, every single hat from sort of creative director to eventually interim CEO, and really got to see how communities grow, scale, and the challenges that come with that, and the opportunities that come with that. Learned a ton there.
Can we pause on that for just 1 second? Because so Summit was started how many years ago now?
About 15.
About 15, and you were there for say, let's say the second 5. Is that kind of roughly correct?
Exactly.
And I mean, it's so interesting for those who don't know Summit. As Alex just said, it really went from being kind of a conference and like maybe a younger, cooler conference, right? There was Summit at Sea and real luminaries, Bill Clinton, et cetera, speaking at Summit at Sea and really getting together with that community. Think of it as like a tight knit TED, very high level communities. But then it got incredibly ambitious in terms of creating community. And I think if I had Balaji on the podcast late last year, and he talked about the network state and ultimately groups of people that are networked together owning land and having diplomatic recognition. I mean, Summit is maybe one of the ones that's become closest because they do actually own land collectively, and they have had political luminaries speak. So wow, pretty damn close. And what are the lessons of Summit that you take with you every day?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. I think for context, what Ian's sort of referencing is about halfway through organizing this network of conferences and festivals all around the world, the Summit community sort of put together this ambitious plan to acquire a sort of a more semi-permanent home where the community could sort of gather year round was the vision. And we found our way through a series of opportunities into a bankrupt ski resort called Powder Mountain that was family run, and put together a buyout package for about $50 million from the crowdfunded from the community to purchase the ski resort and sort of develop essentially like a temporary city that was a little bit more permanent. And the idea was to sort of create a new frontier of an Aspen or a Telluride, but centered around different ideology. So same outdoor recreational focus, skiing, snowboarding, outdoor, mountain biking, lake, swimming in the lake, but centered around diversity, ideas, culture, as opposed to a lot of other ski resorts, which were founded, many, many years ago, being a little bit more sort of monocultural. And that was set to be sort of the flagship home base of this global summit community of about 20,000 folks that would convene over a series of events that would happen seasonally. And so as for lessons learned, it's actually interesting because my passion for DAOs specifically, like new economic models and new governing models for groups of people, emerged through my leadership and learning at Summit, where I really began to see the challenges of running a community business in terms of the incentives becoming sort of misaligned over a long period of time through, one, a community's desire to just decentralize over time, which I think is like super inherent to the ethos of any community, is like the sort of fractalization and independence of subgroups that will emerge over time. And then the desire of a business, which needs to exist in terms of generating, revenue and existing, sort of creating a lot of challenging nuances of like, how do both grow sort of symbiotically? And so I think ultimately what became one of my biggest lessons learned from Summit was that the challenges of trying to operate like sort of a multi-headed business unit on top of a community ultimately became very, very challenging without the right sort of community incentives or communication channels or ownership. And that was probably like the underlying lesson that I think we were playing at with all those different years. And then I think, on top of that, the big question of like, how do you keep community cool is something that I think about all the time. And I think anyone who's a part of scenes, culturally, music, art, technology, we think about this all the time. Like, Ian, I'm super curious your perspective, because I have a personal belief that nothing stays cool forever. It just goes into different cycles of what cool means. And it's about developing a structure that allows for that coolness to be flexible and adaptive over time and to take on different meanings, where then you sort of escape that conundrum by entering like legacy status, where you've gone through enough iterations of yourself through new albums or new inventions or new epochs that then allow you to escape the trend and become something that is just culturally resonant. And I think that is a very challenging thing for communities. And I think Summit has very much gone through those different undulations. And that is also another learning lesson is how to design the right structure so that a community or a brand or a group can stay cool for a longer period of time, is another thing that I've sort of learned a ton from in my experience at Summit.
Yeah, just to pause on that, I think that's an incredibly interesting observation, and it's funny. I think about it in a whole bunch of scenarios. I mean, look at what I said earlier. I saw Willie Nelson and Keith Richards. I mean, talk about two people that have gone through the ups and downs of being, more and less cool, right? And think about like the Stones in the 80s, or I mean, when I saw the Stones on, when Zoe was born in 1990 on the Steel Wheels tour, we called it the Steel Wheelchair Tour, which is, funny considering how old they are now, but it's because they weren't that cool anymore. But then you're right. The runway gets longer, and, if you've really sort of stayed true to your ethos, I'm on the board at Dr. Martens, talk about a brand that's, been around forever and is still, both sold in malls and somehow cool, like that's an incredible feat. A brand like Vans has, certainly had its ups and downs, but generally speaking, you're talking about a brand that you could see on your friend's mom and see on a pro skateboarder, right? And it works in both. There's something interesting. I don't want to say the numbers because A, maybe they're not public, and B, I might get them wrong from memory, but I was with the CEO of Golden Goose recently, and he told me, what the founder of Golden Goose, got it to in terms of revenue, over the first, 12 or so years of the company. And it was sort of less than, say, 20 million in revenue. And then, where they are now, which is, triple digit millions, in revenue, and a really, sizable business. And I actually think that's, and by the way, it's one of the lessons I think that I hope people take away from this overall series that we're doing, that building brands takes an incredibly long time, and there isn't really a venture-backed way to build a brand, in the way that we think about in the tech world. In other words, that 12 years of slow growth for Golden Goose was super important to the more hockey stick trajectory that followed. Because it's also, I think, to your point, Alex, some of it is just generational, right? Like for Golden Goose, you got to have like a Virgil has to know it as a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old or 18-year-old, and know it as a 30-year-old, and then what his reflection of it is later is actually super important to the definition of it, right? Because it's impossible to go, oh, this new cool thing, that's much less meaningful than, oh, that was my shit when I was 20, right? And you kind of have to like make it through. In a way, people are doubting you, but once you've made it through and you've shown that you're really going to be here, kind of no matter what, then you get accepted. And I think that kind of brand building is super interesting, and it's a really interesting lens, to look at, say, Summit or FWB as well, and realize sort of, even after 15 years, how young Summit is as a brand on a relative basis. And then after, however many years, how old FWB is. So let's turn to that. Like what is FWB and what's your role there?
Yeah. So by the way, the funny thing about timelines I always think about is interesting. Yeah. 15 years microscopic. FWB is about 2.5 years old. So that's like literally embryonic in terms of like the grand life cycle of brand development. But I find that to be, time as an incredible variable in the development of these different.
Well, and at the same time, that's a longish or a mid-ish period of time in a venture-backed tech company life cycle.
Exactly. So yeah, I think in terms of what FWB is and my role is there. So Friends with Benefits is a community at its core. But really what makes it different is we've created our own sort of cultural currency, which is the FWB token, that connects all of our different communities sort of endeavors and projects and outputs under the framework of sort of a new type of social network. And we've been thinking about it really as this new type of social network over the last few years, in that when we first originated it, it was purely experimental and frankly an accident. It was bootstrapped inside of a Discord server. Trevor McFedris, the founder who's founded Lil Michaela, and a couple other sort of cultural projects, was former DJ, was really interested in the exploration of what cultural, if crypto could store financial value in an asset, akin to DeFi, could you store cultural value inside of an asset? And that was sort of like really the art experiment in the framework, and had sort of spawned the FWB token as almost like a sort of a community object or sort of an item that he passed amongst different friends inside of art, music, and technology spaces as a way to play with the medium in and of itself. And that asset was then, a Discord server was then sort of gated to that asset. And FWB was born with a dozen folks inside of a Discord talking about what Web3 was before it was even called Web3. And so we always say, since its genesis, FWB has actually been a sort of a social network. It's been one that not necessarily that had its own platform, but really a community of folks gathered around a like-minded set of interests and values who were really curious about the sort of mechanics and the vision of what Web3 could unlock, which to us is really all revolves around the promise of what does a better internet look like. I think a lot of us grew up on forums. A lot of us grew up, accessing the earliest forms of social networking, the internet, and are quite disappointed and jaded by sort of the current landscape, and specifically as it relates to like how creatives and artists are able to create and monetize and distribute their work, or how how folks are able to sort of like custody or own their data. A lot of us were really interested in what this new sort of era represented, and FWB sort of was the watering hole in the space where those conversations and those activities were able to congregate. So at its essence, Friends with Benefits is a social network. We have built and now launched our own platform. What makes us unique is we are one of the first social DAOs that is operated and governed by a social token. So it's completely community owned in the respect that the token, the FWB token, sort of governs the major initiatives and actions that the community goes out and pursues, whether it's a music festival that we're doing this summer, FWB Fest, or it's continuing to invest in various different projects and technology. A lot of that is sort of decided and discussed and promoted within this ecosystem that is community sort of like operated.
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask Alex, like, I think it's super interesting with the kind of, like we were talking about with shared incentives via this kind of tokenized ownership of the community. And I thought it might be kind of nice to go into, how we think that worked, right? Like, did that actually align incentives in the correct way? And are there other kinds of ways we could have membership, right? And like, what are the kind of pros and cons of those now that you've been doing it for 2 years? Like, what do you think of the kind of shared incentives in that structure?
Yeah, it's I've actually reflected on that for a while, because I think in the early days, Trevor and I, we were all really maybe a little bit like blunt in that we thought like the core incentive would be financial. I think we were like, okay, we're now essentially taking an asset and distributing that with the asset's ability to go up or go down, and that'll be the main reason why people want to contribute or do things. I think the learning over time has actually been that it's less about the financial instrument and it's more about what the financial instrument represents in a larger cultural community context. And I say that as in, I think, objects, we prescribe meaning to them, and financial value is one of them. But what that really represents is, I think, recognition of someone's sort of involvement and contribution into, essentially them being a part that contributes to the larger sum of its whole. And so I would say that over time, I've actually learned the stronger incentive is creating the right sort of status and the right recognition and the right frameworks for folks to sort of receive social signal and community signal and feelings that their work is being valued. And then the financial instrument or the tokenized component is more of like the underlying, hey, we're all on the same team, which is why I've sort of learned, frankly, and have formed the belief that NFTs are actually slightly stronger sort of community objects, because they are visual, they have identification, they can become one's identity. No one's necessarily making an Ethereum token their profile picture, but they sure as hell are making all these various different PFPs, because I think folks feel like a sort of more of a cultural and identity resonance to that, which I think directly correlates more towards, let's call them, community incentives.
I was just going to maybe summarize for the audience who's less familiar with how FWB works. So FWB was started in 2020, and it was a token, and then you had to basically buy a certain number of tokens to get access to the community, correct? If I recall correctly, I remember it being like somewhere around $75 worth of tokens is what it cost when I joined in late 2020. And then those, but then you could buy as many as you wanted. If you were a big believer, you could buy a big bag of FWB. Price goes up, price goes down. It's crypto speculation land, right? And then if I'm if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying, okay, that sort of crypto speculation does create a set of incentives. Maybe they're not the ones that you want, if you were doing it today, you may have done it just with sort of a membership token, a la Proof Collective. Is that correct?
I don't know. I mean, I think what is interesting is, like, I think, the what we would have done differently is always an interesting conversation, because I think had ERC 721s or NFTs specifically been more of a form factor, then I think the membership component of FWB should have and would have been an NFT, right? Mostly because it allows for the community to actually generate revenue in a way that's like compliant and makes sense. But I think ultimately, the FWB as like the social currency of itself, I think does create a lot of interesting behaviors that we see that we really like and we want to promote. Like, we see a lot of people giving FWB to other folks to join the community. I don't think you would see that as clearly with an NFT. I don't think people were giving proof collective passes or board apes to other people to join. And I think that kind of notion of FWB, which especially in bear markets like now, we see a lot more people joining FWB through friends, onboarding their friends, which is, we think of it like the merch table at a concert, where it really is a little bit more low stakes, low fi, where it is like you're onboarding friends through giving them a ticket and then they're coming to the show, as opposed to this being this like formal, rigid structure.
Yeah. And then I guess the other piece that's really interesting about, kind of a token ownership in the community is voting, right? So can we talk a little bit, for people that might not be as familiar about, kind of how the DAO works from a governance perspective?
Yeah. So right now, major initiatives are taken to proposal either by sort of the contributing team or the community. That goes up on Snapshot, and the community is allowed to vote on the outcome of that, usually a binary outcome, yes or no, pass or not pass, of that proposal with their tokens. And currently, that voting is done under a one token, one vote system. But we actually just passed a proposal a week ago or 2 weeks ago that will be evolving that voting structure into something a lot more egalitarian, shifting it slightly more towards one member, one vote. So in other words, creating a flatter voting system so that votes are more, let's call them contentious, as opposed to 99% pass. Because I actually think that more contentious voting and discussion is actually ultimately better for a community, because it forces that community to look internally and question itself, its structure, ways to improve. And in my opinion, if everything is a 99% pass, there's likely, it's not really a solid governance system.
And then I also was thinking a little bit about the difference between, interim CEO of Summit, right? And then I think we call you mayor of FWB, right? And so you have this, you were talking about kind of how Summit, you think it kind of, every community kind of goes toward decentralization kind of innately. And I wonder, as a mayor of a truly decentralized community, what do you think the big differences in those roles are? How do you see your big role as the mayor of FWB? What are you facilitating?
Yeah. So it's funny because I said one day I said the title of mayor kind of as a joke inside of the chat, and people really liked it, and then it just kind of stuck because I needed a title to call myself when I started speaking at conferences or on media and stuff. Because I never felt comfortable calling myself a CEO or a lead, because I don't view that as my role. I'm not here to make executive decisions on behalf of a community of people. I don't think that's really possible. And really, when you ask what is my ultimate goal, my true goal in terms of my role in this larger experiment project community is to successfully exit myself out of my own role. I think if I can actually do the right job and a good job, which a lot of it is setting up the right infrastructure, I should hopefully innovate myself out of a role in the next year or two, because FWB should be sufficiently decentralized through the right proposal creation processes. I think what's left ahead of me to build, to successfully leave it in a position where I can exit, or a core team can exit, is it needs a sustainable revenue model. And that's sort of my core laser focused vision over the next year and a half, is to really establish a sustainable repeat revenue model into a community treasury that the community can then deploy amongst whatever initiatives that it wants to invest in, and to set up sort of the right infrastructure, which to us is the mobile application, the events network, the media properties, so that the community can then populate and create that activity on top of that infrastructure that we've created, to continue to grow and sustain itself. So really, I view the reason why the mayor sort of definition really resonated with me a year and a half ago, was because in a lot of different urban theory discussion and discourse, there's a lot of perspectives that a mayor should never have sort of a mayor's role is to sort of implement the right departments in a city, and to allow for those departments to sort of coordinate with its citizens or its community to then develop that direction over time, and versus a mayor having an explicit vision that it mandates on top of its people. And so that's where I try to really walk this line between like, cool, FWB is this community defined thing, but also I'm aware that in moments of crisis or in moments of difficulty, a leader also needs to step in. So that's sort of the fine line of the role that I see in myself. But ultimately, my goal is to innovate myself out of a role so that once FWB becomes sustainable, so that it really can be a decentralized network of various different communities, which is how we've always seen FWB.
Okay, so explain that to me a little further in specifically the vision. For me, I'm a believer in benevolent dictators. I don't think a democracy could have built Apple, right? But what I'm grokking what you're saying, which I think is deep and interesting. And what you're saying is that if you have this kind of decentralized network of communities, and they sort of have the means of production and the means of monetization. So there's both a platform and a way to make money. Then they can self-sustain. I would think though that you would always need that leader, as you said, to kind of provide vision. I think as Ledger CEO Pascal Gauthier likes to tell the team, Napoleon said that leaders do two things: they define reality and they give hope, right? And so leadership does have a place in a community. So could you describe for me a bit like what you think FWB looks like a year from now or a year and a half from now? And I'm curious in some of the specifics. You mentioned them already. The media properties, the events, the social network, the app itself. Could you and because even those require decisions on, we're going to do this, we're not going to do that, and putting those to a vote could be a little dangerous. You end up with what Balaji calls a 51% democracy. So I'm curious, maybe just those two things, like what does it look like a year from now, and what are the specific things that FWB is doing today to get to that point?
Yeah. So I think, firstly, I want to sort of opine on one component, which I actually don't think that future, interesting structures like this are leaderless. I just think they're leaderful, is what I call them. So it's more about promoting a structure where you actually can have emergent leadership, because I do think vision is incredibly important for anything to survive or exist or to push forward or to innovate. I don't think it's a group of people who sort of have a lackluster, idea of the future, but it's more so a structure where those leaders can be promoted within, and actually these economies or these communities can be more pluralist in nature, as opposed to like necessarily having one explicit person setting a vision over a repeat period of time. At least for me, what I think works for interesting community structures. In terms of what FWB is, today and where it is in a year, the grand exercise of what we've been doing has really been asking ourselves for something that was started without an explicit vision or a purpose. What is its vision or purpose? Like FWB really was just a group of people hanging out in the beginning, and figuring out and making sense of what Web3 was and is and what it continues to be. I think lately, and really the rallying cry that a lot of us have been getting excited around is this new form of a social network, one that is community owned, community decided, and community sort of like operated, and what that looks like over the next year is really the ability to access this digital platform. And once you access that, you have at your fingertips thousands of events all over the world that are community run and organized, from gallery tours to concerts to a festival organized. So it's access to a community run network of events, and then the digital social nature that connects all those different nodes and pieces together around topics, conversations, forum culture that connects this network of events. You can almost think of it like a Web3 run resident advisor or sort of meetup.com, whatever these frameworks of event networks, but one that is sort of bottoms up and community governed from its core. I think the meat in between all that, that has been really driving a lot of us has been this notion of collective intelligence. And sort of an FWB as this collective intelligence network. And we think of like lately, as the world becomes more and more AI-ified, right? Everything becomes a prompt that you can ask into a machine, and it spits out the most data-driven, algorithmically correct response, we actually think there's going to be an incline in the need for curatorial opinion and perspective. Like, I think asking ChatGPT, what restaurant should I go to tonight? It might spit out the #1 rated restaurant in LA, but I'd rather ask Rayhan what I should eat tonight, because like he's just crawled all of LA and knows it has a perspective and an opinion. So we think of FWB as sort of the counter to maybe this more like technical, sterile, like data sets and search engines, and we think of it as like a human sort of intelligence network that exists on top of the platform that we've created that allows for that intelligence and that information to sort of be harnessed, whether it's through chat or group chat or forums or sort of content. We think of FWB as like a collectively curated and incentivized intelligence network that gathers over events, festivals, media, etc., as almost like a new age lifestyle brand that also has these sort of connected properties.
And what about the sustainability? You said that you're laser focused on creating a sustainable model. So how do you do that? Because none of these things are going to, if you and I started a music festival, we might lose money the first couple of years, right? So, shit, that's dangerous. How do we know that that's the right direction to go in? How do we decide it's like not working and we pull the cord? How do you do that sort of, investment, spend money to make money thing in a decentralized way and get that flywheel spinning so that this thing is sustainable and ultimately scales?
Yeah, so I think fundamentally the core revenue model, if we're talking about like income, like what allows what's sort of the import export model here, right? I think the core export that we're sort of bringing outside of the FWB ecosystem in terms of what allows for it to operate is building in a sort of repeat revenue stream that I think ties into membership. I think what a lot of people don't know about how FWB works is that when somebody buys FWB tokens to join, the treasury doesn't receive a single dollar of revenue of operating capital. It just goes into the liquidity pool through Uniswap that someone on the other side who's providing FWB and ETH sort of benefits from or has FWB taken from or deposited to, right? So in terms of FWB's sort of historic, it hasn't generated operating revenue off of its FWB. So the first shift we're making in the next couple of months is implementing a new membership mechanic and a protocol upgrade where now members join, they sort of buy FWB, they sort of interact with FWB, they receive FWB, so they still get ownership in the community, but there's sort of an entry fee or an entry tax that goes into the community treasury, and in exchange they receive this identity card or membership card or passport, as we're calling it, that is then their like access card, benefit card into the FWB ecosystem. So based on our modeling for that, that's already going to make, in our current growth rate and the number of people who apply and join, et cetera, that's going to be an incredible improvement just to the overall economic structure of FWB, where that's going to allow for it to operate a lot more sustainably because now we have income in terms of like immigration tax, right?
Yep.
I think additionally, to date, FWB's done about $2 million in sponsorship or partnerships, which is not a great place to rely on, but it's sort of been the only lever that we've been able to pull to remain sort of sustainable. And that comes through the festival, that comes through our events, that comes through different products and projects. We'll partner with OpenSea to help them curate the homepage, and they'll contribute, ETH or value to the DAO. So we carve out a number of these different sorts of partnerships or collaborations to generate revenue to the treasury. I think the bigger vision, of how the FWB becomes not only sustainable, but frankly, economically interesting for all parties involved is when FWB can really become more of an economy. And so that I think means, how does FWB become an environment or an ecosystem or a city where there are many transactions between members, between structures of the fundamental sort of currency in and of itself. I think that goes up and down based on larger macro conditions of crypto and utility of crypto, and that's been probably one of the biggest challenges to be building and sort of inside of. But the overall vision is, what does FWB look like more as like a marketplace as opposed to a membership club? And that's what we've been really pushing ourselves to think about, because I think it's more interesting for all parties involved in terms of not just, hey, all right, this is another extractive membership club model, like let's say a Soho House where you just pay recurring dues. Like, there was an interesting conversation, Zoe, that I think you were part of too, where in the community folks were saying, we want we want FWB to put a membership recurring due on us. And I've never been a part of anything where it's users or it's community where like charge us monthly. And I kind of came in to say, hey guys, like it's actually incredible that you guys want FWB to be sustainable and recurring, but to charge a $40 a month fee, I think will actually deter a big chunk of the community besides the 100 active people who are in governance, and probably take us further away from this goal of creating an economy which should have frictionless transactions and interactions, where eventually the larger net model of FWB is just increasing GDP and economic activity of its citizens. So I would say the larger sustainability model, once we build a lot of these building blocks in place, like revenue through, let's call them, if we're going to stick with the city analogy, sustainable tax, community aligned tax streams, income, entry, et cetera, to then eventually be exploring more interesting, trade exchange models between groups and members inside of FWB.
I just want to say something for the listeners, because I love this, by the way. This is so truly mind bending when you think about it, because actually what you're doing, Alex, is relatively simple. You're a small group of people kind of showing up to work every day and trying to move this thing forward, right? It's what anyone does at any startup. At the same time, I encourage the listeners to go check out my the podcast I did with Balaji Srinivasan in I think it was back in October. It's on the Ledger series, and he's done a bazillion others, including like an epic 8-hour Lex Friedman. But the concept of the network state, which you can read at thenetworkstate.com, is really relevant backstory to what Alex is talking about. The other thing is, on Balaji's podcast himself, he has a great podcast with the founder and also the CEO. Those are two separate people at Shopify, who are self-proclaimed crypto maxis, and Shopify has a GDP that's larger than a lot of countries. And it's interesting, when you think about, it's not that. In other words, what I was going to encourage the audience to do is join FWB for exactly the same reason that I did back in 2020, and exactly the same reason I encouraged Zoe to around the same time or shortly thereafter. Because what an incredible experiment to watch and be a part of. And you guys really are trying to find the dynamics of a network state. And actually, for anyone listening, you have this opportunity to be a part of it, which is, so you can listen to this conversation and you can go, okay, these guys are weird. Or you could do what I encouraged Zoe to do, which is like, jump in and just feel what it's like, and be a part of it. As you're saying, Alex, it's a democracy of sorts, right? Where somebody who's listening right now could be a voting member of what you're doing tomorrow. Literally, you're not keeping them out. You're not you're actually inviting them in. And what an incredible experiment, because what you're saying is that what you'd like to get to is an actual economy. And I love that you're using the words like immigration tax. And you're talking about having, kind of a tax base, and, but then ultimately what you want is for the community members to benefit from one another. And that's what you mean by economy. Am I correct?
Exactly. And I think I love that you've been referencing Balaji, because, a lot of his, while I'm not 100% aligned with a lot of his network state theory, I do think the frameworks are interesting. And he actually wrote us, when we put out the application, when we put out the mobile app, saying that he thought this was one of the interesting emerging paths to network states and decentralizing social media. He said, build a private social network in Discord, set up an admissions process to ensure community alignment, and then eventually build your own platform and code your own app. And I thought that was really interesting, because he essentially regurgitated back to us our plan under his network state framework, because that is exactly what we've been trying to do. And we started first with the sort of currency in and of itself, which if you read David Graeber and the first 1,000 years of debt, the whole idea of humans were trading seashells between each other and ascribe meaning to those objects, and often communities and economies are started first through gifting until something becomes recognized as the sort of unit of value between a group of people that then get prescribed meaning. And FWB was whatever 0.005 cents in its early days. It wasn't even about the money; it was about its meaning. And so, yeah, Ian, I think to kind of reflect off of what you shared, the day to day, it does feel like a small group of people dealing with all the trials and tribulations of a startup, which is and I always joke around at folks who ask, what's it like still working in crypto, and are you still invested in it? Like, yes, I'm still invested in it, but it comes with incredible challenges that it's building a startup inside of this larger, insane macro, sort of ecosystem. But I think the at the end of the day, full stop, the core motivational driver to all of us who are contributing to FWB, I think to a majority of the community members who are invested and participate, is we just do believe in more interesting economic models for communities and groups of people. We're really how realistic is a FWB as an FWB token based economy right now? Probably not that realistic. But how interesting is it in a world where if we can all continue to build projects, media, technology, culture on top of this platform that continues to grow and scale? How interesting is it for a sort of a digital network, a city that isn't physically distributed yet to exist? That's what's really, really, I think, motivating to all of us.
Yeah, and I would just say too, like, I just remember joining FWB in 2020. We're all locked in our houses, and like, it really did feel like, a new iteration of IRC with like a bunch of really interesting people to like hang out with, right? Like that was our friend group, right, in 2020. And so we have this like really deep connection, right, with the kind of founding members. And then what I just want to talk about quickly, as I know we're kind of coming up toward the end of the conversation here, is, what we've been able to do at FWB now is start to see all of these people IRL, right? And last year was the first time that FWB Fest happened. I didn't make it because I had a brand new infant then, but I know it was magical and incredible, and I just wanted to give you a chance, Zhang, to kind of like tell us a little bit about what it's like to kind of convene the community, off of the Discord, and give us a preview of kind of, what to expect for Fest this year, what's going to be new and improved after our learnings from Fest 1.
Yeah. So I think a big component of Friends with Benefits is this URL to IRL relationship. I think what sets us apart from a lot of other DAOs or sort of pure crypto networks is the network state component, that we really want to use the platform and the tooling to convene people in person. I think how we started this conversation about my fundamental passions and interests is bringing people together. It's why I worked in music. It's why I worked in art. I believe that those are incredible mediums for strengthening human connection. And FWB Fest was sort of a community, our community's biggest expression of that, where we convened, 600 people at a private liberal arts campus, high school campus that we rented out last summer, to essentially take this digital city framework that we've been talking about and bringing it to life. And so the idea was like half community contributors, half music and talent that we booked that were sort of adjacent to our community, 3 days of sort of deprogrammed experience. So it felt almost like, it had the sort of framework of a conference or a music festival, and that there were talks and performances. But the most interesting things by far were the conversations happening, in the woods and the campus, and a lot of the unstructured conversations that just took place in the library, where groups of people came together to talk about, the future of composable NFTs or putting together new proposals for different projects. And so the vision for it really is, and FWB has sort of been this amalgamation of different people who have worked in events over the last 20 years, is can we create a sort of pop-up semi-autonomous zone or temporary city for a few days in the woods? It's kind of back to our, I don't know, communist, Marxist, like back to the farm kind of energies, but we're really interested in, like, while it might look like a music festival, the larger vision is essentially creating a participatory multi-day convening experience, no difference than like, a Ren Fair or, Burning Man, as like frameworks where they are bottoms up and community run, that exist to convene, what we sort of have been calling the best in class and sort of state, the current state of internet culture, technology, and art. And so the vision for Fest this year, taking place in early August 4th, is to sort of convene all these different components of the FWB ecosystem again for 3 days, and to really make it a place where, it is where we come to share the latest and greatest art, music, technology that is occurring inside of our ecosystem to the broader world. And this is the first year where we're just selling tickets because so many people wanted to come last year who couldn't get over the hurdle of buying an NFT to come. And this year we're just selling tickets and making FWB sort of the community currency on the ground at the festival. And we're really excited to see how that sort of pans out with an incredible roster of talent that we're going to be actually announcing in about a week or so.
Wow. So this is the music fest, right?
Yeah.
And where will it be? And
In Idlewild.
In Idlewild again.
Yeah, same
Amazing.
location.
I think they funded a skate park last year at Idlewild, if I'm not mistaken, which I don't know
Oh
if I
yeah,
ever
Ian,
told
you would
you.
have loved this. They're I don't know if you've been to Idlewild, but it's this kooky little mountain town about 2 hours east of LA. That's beautiful.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it, but I've never been.
It's incredible, and it's okay. If you love Topanga, it's like the weirder cousin of Topanga. And so during the festival, there were flyers all around the campus saying help fund the local skate park in Idlewild, and we all saw it, and obviously we all loved it and fucked with it. And so we essentially spun up a crypto fundraising version, and we raised the 20 grand in 5 minutes. And we helped the school transfer the crypto into a wallet, turn it into cash, fund the skate park, and now they've spray painted the birds on the skateboard ramp, and we're gonna do a little opening skate park demo this year on the Thursday of the festival.
Oh man, that is amazing. I love that. That is a great story, and it does encapsulate the power of what you're doing, and that's what I was really trying to do before too, because there is kind of the heady philosophical side of it, and then there's the day to day. You're writing code. You are managing a community. You are helping physical community. I was texting you on whatever night that was, Thursday night, saying, "Hey, can you help me get into Stubbs?" because Rayhan was DJing and my mom and I wanted to come. So and to that, will you tell people, we've referenced it, but we haven't described it, the social network, the mobile app, what is it? Where are you with it? And then I'm curious overall, how's it going? In terms of numbers. I know the world of crypto has been up and down, and and especially the world of NFTs is as down as it's ever been in the past 2 years. So where are you guys? What are you seeing and feeling, and what do the numbers look like in your community? But maybe start with, what is the mobile app? What's your ambition there? And then how's it going, getting it rolling?
Yeah, so I think the genesis for the mobile application was we were sort of, everything has been built on top of Discord to date, right? We've created all these bots, we've created all these unique custom tools that all sit on top of Discord. But I think we all agree the future of DAOs and the future of whatever Web3 is does not look like a Discord server. So we were pretty clear on that about a year ago. We began to build various different tools. The first one we created was a tool called Gatekeeper, which was our own ticketing RSVP Web3 system that allowed for anyone who held a token to essentially sign up for a ticket to a physical event and verify that on site. We started to build all these other tools that didn't have a central hub or a central user experience until we realized, wait, we probably just need our own mini platform. We don't want to recreate Discord, but we probably should build something that is unique to FWB, so custom community tooling that fits the needs of a decentralized events network, which is what FWB is. And so the FWB application is essentially a step in that direction, and we launched its V0001 to our community about 2 months ago, and it essentially contains three major components. One, all of our events are now aggregated into one place where you can sign up for the events, register for the events, create your own events, all inside of one application. Two, governance, so now you can vote and directly see what's up for vote inside of one application. And then three, this main sort of hub, which is the social feed, where you can now see the aggregated social activity of FWB in one sort of location and feed. And so the idea is taking the core community memetics and behaviors that we've seen exist in the FWB ecosystem, but take the parts that we felt like were a lot simpler and distill that into its own user experience. So the larger vision for the FWB application is to become the software that powers and operates all of FWB and eventually replaces Discord over a multi-year horizon. We're not trying to replace it yet because clearly the Discord is still the home of FWB, but we want to first start with utility, ticketing, governance, benefits, identity, profile, status, reputation, all those sorts of things that Discord can never do, and then eventually begin to sort of consume and have the main a main sort of citizen or members experience in FWB be this mobile application that grants you access to this network state, essentially. So it really is meant to be our digital home. And what we saw in the first month of launch is we saw like 60% network conversion, which is amazing. Everyone joining the app. And then we have like a 70% retention rate of people like opening the app, checking it daily, which is a really cool signal that people want to see what's happening inside of this ecosystem. They just couldn't use Discord anymore because Discord has like a major fatigue issue of like, once you've joined 5 communities, you're pretty much shot and you can't really like filter through them all. So that's kind of our vision for the mobile application. In terms of like macro crypto headwinds and numbers up, down, I think we're all in the same kind of bucket, right? I think liquidity is just down across the board in terms of like who has spare cash to put into a liquidity pool that then, is what sort of like bolsters and upholds sort of numbers and price. I think, we view it at FWB as like, an opportunity, frankly, where we actually see higher numbers of applicants joining and frankly, better applicants joining, more creatives when price and economy is down, because they view it a little bit more as like experimental. I'll jump in. It's only a couple $100 as opposed to at its peak, it was like $8,000 to join FWB, which was actually really upsetting me because I was like, cool, we now literally can't welcome the people we want most to join the community when we're doing our best. So that's actually a big component of this membership proposal that just passed, is we're decoupling immigration policy from monetary policy. So now in the future, when we implement this new membership upgrade, as FWB price increases again, that won't gate fixed entry will be fixed from now on. It'll be a flat price. Immigration price is what you pay to join FWB, and it's a lot more accessible. And there will be the FWB component that is more variable, but it will never reach now the issue of like FWB is now $30,000 to join because it's way too expensive.
I was just going to say it kind of decouples the membership from the casino, right? Of the of crypto kind of hype, which is cool. Yeah, I think it's super interesting.
Yeah, exactly. I know. If you guys have a few more minutes, there's one big topic that we didn't get to cover, Alex, and that is we touched on it, but we didn't go deeper, and I'd like to. And that's the topic of brand, and creating brands in this world. What's your vision for FWB as a brand, and how do you think you get to that place where you are a long-term brand that is kind of as meaningful as the Aspen Institute, or one that, as you were saying earlier, kind of runs on its own power?
Yeah. I spend most of my time sort of thinking about that intersectionality between community culture and brand, and like sort of the theory around all of that, and have various different beliefs of like, can a decentralized community truly create a legacy brand? I think there's interesting examples of, say, like, the Grateful Dead and Deadheads, and I think that being a pretty emergent bottoms-up culture, but still having its icons and its heroes and the folks sort of setting the aesthetic and the vision, but then the community is who's doing the remix culture. Like, I went to a Dead show last summer in Bethel, sort of home of Woodstock, as like the Mecca, just because I was super curious to see what that experience would look like, because I'd gone to Dead shows at the Hollywood Bowl, and wanted to see what the source looked like, and my mind was blown. It was like, Shakedown Street, rows and rows and rows of like remix culture taking place, of Moms for Dead making mom merch, like Vets for Dead making dog pouches with tie-dye and dead lore and memorabilia. So I frankly think of FWB culture as fitting closer into that sort of realm. So less sort of like top-down brands are super tight, our logo can only be displayed in this way ever. I think what's most interesting about FWB is creating this foundation and allowing for the community to sort of iterate upon it, creating more of like a headless brand structure. So really, I think sort of a model that we really look for in the future has been one in which we think of like, all right, what does FWB look like as the ultimate sort of headless, community-owned lifestyle brand? So you can insert various different like culture brands, clothing brands, whether that's like Supreme or whether that's, these different brain dead, these different like cultural brands that sort of convene people. What does that look like in a more sort of bottoms up community owned way? And we also think about it as well, like, Ian, in early days, like, it's less in terms of scale, but I think a web, like a LVMH structure is incredibly interesting. And, that took an incredibly long period of time and a legacy to sort of create. But we've always been inspired by this notion of co-owned properties and sort of invested properties that retain their own IP with this sort of parent brand that sits sort of in the background, but that still has a legacy sort of brand attached to it. And so we think of FWB as we now hold equities and tokens in many different projects that we've incubated. And we think of the development of some of, of those as their own individual brands, that FWB over, let's say in 10 years, is a holding group, is a community-owned holding group of these various different properties, like the music festival, like the software sort of application process, like the various different companies that have spun out of FWB from our hackathons and our various different community initiatives. So we see it being somewhere as a hybrid between like a holding company and a lifestyle brand that is a little bit more headless, and that the community is able to sort of interpret it with a very foundational set of brand guidelines that we've sort of instilled and put forward.
And how do you keep it cool?
The ultimate $1 million question. I think you keep it cool by allowing it to blow up and re-come together again a bunch of different times. I think cool kids love chaos. And I think by like allowing and viewing any brand as having life cycles and epochs and allowing for this consistent divergence and convergence to come back together again in this like fractalization, I think that's how you keep it cool. Like I think it's funny, I've watched it from FWB start where, it was like couple of us me, Rehan, Trevor, et cetera, in the room, cooking, to now like I'm viewed as kind of like the government and I'm not cool anymore. And it's like it's fine. I'm sick. I'm down with it because there's now a whole new group of people in FWB where there's mutual respect, but now they're like trying to work on their own stuff inside of it. And I think it's our role as the organizing structure to give those groups resources, to fund them, to give them spotlights, to give them status, to let them fork or build things inside of it that then can exit it that are still sort of attached to it in some way. So there's connectivity. I think that's how you keep things cool, is you allow for a community to feel empowerment and independence to define their own subcultures. Because I think, a big reference I draw from is Christopher Alexander, the architect, and he says any great city is a mosaic of subcultures, which is something that I've always resonated with. It's like New York City is cool because Bushwick is in the same zone as the Upper East Side. Both have totally different meanings of cool, but what makes New York City cool is the fact that both citizens of both neighborhoods can go kick it in Washington Square Park. And so like that's at least how I think a lot about the design in FWB is now you have, we're at almost like 8,000, 9,000 token holders. There's so many different factions. There's like the tech guys at FWB. There's the cool skate kids in FWB. There's the anarchist FWBs. It's like, let them all do their own things. Let them build their own superstructures inside of FWB. Create Washington Square Park where they can all convene every now and then, which to me is like fast.
And buy loose joints.
And to me is the application. Yeah.
I think it was David Lee Roth got busted for buying loose joints in Washington Square Park. So I think that is exactly the right call. And it's really a great place to wrap on. I love that analogy. I love what you're saying. And I also think, for people who are listening, again, when I say come join FWB, that's not a recruiting tactic, or it's not financial advice. It's really just saying, if you're listening to this and you're interested in this topic, here's a great experiment that is running today that's not theoretical. Again, you can sit at home by yourself and read the network state, which I recommend, but I also recommend, participating in something that's happening in real time, and and watching it unfold. And I like what you're saying there. I always say that there's no such thing as crypto. Crypto is a collection of communities. I also think it's interesting and directly related that I also say that Discord is kind of a great representation of humanity at the moment, because it's a collection of closed communities. And what you're saying is, even within FWB, what you want FWB to be is a collection of communities, like New York City is, that all come together in a town square, and I love that. I think that's a really kind of brilliant experiment. And I think that, to your point, like, look, I mean, when New York was more dangerous, it was also more cool. These things do go in cycles. And we'll see exactly where it ends up. One thing, just a comment that I wanted to make personally, thinking about what you were saying about leadership and kind of working your way out of a job, and then thinking about LVMH. The thing I was going to share is what's a great lesson from LVMH for me is LVMH. Ben Adeno's investment thesis is to back creativity with operational efficiency. So he creates that structure so that creative people can survive and thrive. And the modern day Celine, led by Hedi Slimane at this point, is a great example where after Phoebe Philo, a lot of people thought Hedi Slimane was the wrong choice. I think revenue went down in the first year, and now it's gone significantly up from where Phoebe left it. And it's an incredible success story, and it is the story of LVMH really putting all the right structure around that creative individual, and having the patience to do that. I think that some of these concepts where you have a leader, and that's a CEO, who can kind of create that operational efficiency and all of the things that are behind the scenes that no one thinks about, distribution and whatnot, that you don't think about. It's not sexy to think about, but it's important. And then you have kind of the various things that surround the creative person. Maybe that's editorial support, storytelling. There are a whole bunch of components there. So I think what I hope is that you do get the right leadership. I like when you said that it's not leaderless, it's leaderful, because I think that that's actually what you have in an LVMH. LVMH is quite leaderful. It is quite distributed.
Exactly.
Actually, it is. Ben Adeno is a CEO of exactly 0 brands at LVMH, right? What he has is incredible CEOs across nearly 100 brands. So LVMH is a great example, actually, of something being leaderful, and it's also a great example of an indisputably incredible financial endeavor. Right? It's gone from 100 billion to 500 billion over the last 10 years in terms of value, and Ben Adeno is now the top of the Forbes list. At the same time, its core premise is kind of creativity on some level to support creative endeavors. So I do think it's a very interesting analogy, and one that I will think about more. So Alex, thank you so much for doing this with us, and Zoe, thank you for bringing me into this. We want to end every show with a few standard questions and get everyone's take on them. And the first one, it's Ariel Wengroff at Ledger, who kind of pushed us in this direction. I know through conversations with you, Alex. And the topic here that resonates with a lot of creative people that we speak to is creative custody. In other words, the ownership of creative people changing. But what does creative custody mean to you?
So yeah, I think what creative custody means to me is synonymous to creative ownership, which to me ultimately represents creative empowerment. I think what drew me into this space in the beginning was the notion that if you own something, you feel more empowered, right? You have that sort of end-to-end control. It can't be taken away from you. That sort of an identity framework around your assets, whether it's your creative assets, your cultural assets, your IP, the fact that you can own that and something that you can take with you, I think is incredibly liberating, and I think represents sort of the next wave of, if there's something that you can own that is yours, but it can still be networked with other properties, that feels like the logical long tail next step of breaking from dependence on platforms that we have no relationship with and that have completely different incentives with. So I think that takes time to get there, but I think creative custody to me means creative empowerment.
I think the next question that we have goes in, stems from the vein of, we're kind of transitioning, the buzzwords are from Web 2 to Web 3, but if you think about it as going from, things that were made to kind of organize information, like the Googles of the world, to things that we are thinking about, kind of like you just mentioned, the value chain, right? And how we ascribe value to things. One of the things we're wondering is how you think of transitioning from, working in a world of information to a world of value, and if you have advice for people that are kind of trying to make that shift.
I think just like we saw in the world of information, there will only be a faster and faster scaled vacuum of that information, of more and more noise, and signal to noise ratio becoming decreased over time. And I think the same thing is going to happen in the era of value. And I think the thread that connects both of them is having a distinct perspective and opinion, and the value of curation. So I think in a world where information becomes more and more sort of commoditized, I think eventually assets will become more and more commoditized. I believe in a world, I think in 20 years, 10 years, everything will have an asset a digital asset attached to it. Everything will have a value attached to it. And I think the relationship to that will be who actually has a perspective and an opinion and can curate and lead. And so it'll be assigning order. It'll be assigning cultural order to those various different assets beyond their financial value.
And so is that, my question was going to be, I like to work backwards from, what are the things that we know will be true, but we don't know how we get there. In the world of in 2002, I knew that there would be a subscription music future, but I couldn't have predicted it would be led by a company from Sweden, and I couldn't have predicted the iPhone would come in 2008. So we were sort of directionally correct, but there were these specifics that we just couldn't get. I believe that 15 years from now, our government document will be digital, and when we tap to pay, we won't be using credit rails. And it won't take me 2 days to do a wire transfer. I think there are many things that we know, but I don't know exactly how we get there. I think there are a lot of bumps in the road on the way to that. But what is that thing that 15 years from now, 20 years from now, that is just impossible for the average person to imagine today, that that you think will just be a part of human life?
Yeah, I love that question. I keep coming back to, I think universal single auth will be a thing that'll be hard to imagine, but will exist everywhere. I think the idea that if we believe in a tokenized future where everything is an asset, and I use the word asset, not necessarily that everything has a financial value, but that everything is a thing that you can own. I think eventually the custody of that moves away from this network of different platforms where I have the same email, like this email password combo that's rigged to like thousands of platforms that I use. I think eventually will shift to, I have identity cards that are digital attached to each of these that I get issued for joining a new website or joining a new thing. That data is custodied and owned by me in my wallet via my my internet, my IP, my connection, and I move seamlessly through the internet using my single login, and I don't have to create a new login every single time I want to do something. I don't have to forget password and reset it because like all these different user experiences thing. I think eventually there's single auth, which I think Google and Facebook got kind of close to, but they were just built inside essential companies, so they'll never be able to reach the scale that I think just a purely custodied single auth will look like, where you can eventually envision, Ian, the passport being in your actual passport being in there as well, and interacting with different websites. And then I think what gets more interesting is if that becomes true, then the ability to transfer and port reputation over from these different platforms. Imagine being able to join a new social network and all of your followers or all of your distribution moves with you to that new platform, and you're not now saying, hey everyone, just made a TikTok on my Instagram, come click this is subscribe here, and like migrating people over. I think eventually all of that data social graph lives in something that you own, that is attached to your identity, that other platforms will have to rewire themselves to call to, as opposed to the other way around.
I love that. I mean, I think that it's funny. I've been saying, the future of identity is ownership. And then as soon as I had that realization, I realized that the presence of identity is ownership in the physical world, right? I mean, I can move borders during COVID because I have both a U.S. passport and a French work ID. I am the owner of both. Therefore, I have privileges that other people on the planet don't have. And, as an FWB holder, there was a party in Paris once that I could get into that other people couldn't. It's that same thing. And so digital ownership, gives you that kind, it's not, I've never gotten into something because I have a Google login. Right. Ownership is the thing that can give you that.
Awesome.
It's really, really great to start off this way. Thank you for doing this with us.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
This content is provided for informational purposes only and is the sole expression of our opinion and should not be relied upon as legal, business, investment, or tax advice. Do your own research. Any loss or profit is your sole responsibility. Stay safe.